Okay, so we've been digging into these BMGC notes he sent in, and chapter 15 especially really jumps out as like this gold mine of insights about like managing projects across borders.
Yeah, definitely. It's a rich chapter.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, the aim is really to kind of pull out those core understandings.
Yeah.
Like what actually changes when projects go global and how to navigate those changes really effectively, right?
Exactly.
We're going for those like aha moments that really highlight the unique challenges, but, without getting too lost in, academic jargon.
Oh, sure.
Because the fundamentals of project management are like timelines and budgets, right?
Yeah.
But bring in international factors, man. It like really shifts the whole game.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about recognizing that, those core project management principles, you got to build upon those.
Yeah.
With a more nuanced and adaptable approach when you're operating internationally, right?
Okay, so let's like nail down the basics, right?
Sure.
According to the notes, what fundamentally is a project? Seems like we got to start there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the notes define a project as a temporary organization, a unique transient endeavor focused on achieving a specific desired outcome.
Right.
Turner and Mueller add that it's the organized use of resources for a unique scope of work.
Okay.
Within time and cost constraints to achieve beneficial change.
Hmm.
But, what's key for you to hold on to are Coaster's 3 core characteristics: a defined beginning-end, and those clear outcomes, unique objectives, context, and resources, and then that ever-present uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
That brings about specific risks.
Okay.
So it's not just ongoing work, it has a life cycle,
Right. So it's a defined undertaking.
Yeah.
With a start and a finish.
Exactly.
And because each one is like unique,
yeah,
we should always expect some level of the unexpected.
For sure.
That makes total sense. So then how does project management step in to handle these like unique temporary endeavors?
Yeah, so project management, as your notes explain, is essentially the temporary organizational framework, right? Encompassing the structure, the processes, the people involved, and the technology they use to mobilize and direct resources towards achieving those specific project goals.
Right.
The typical life cycle you'll see involves initiation, the crucial planning phase, the execution and controlling of the work, and then finally completion.
Right.
And the ultimate aim, of course, is to deliver the project on time within the allocated budget, meeting the agreed scope.
Sure.
And with the desired level of quality. It's about constantly making those necessary trade-offs when you're dealing with limited resources.
Right.
And increasingly, as your notes also mention, considering sustainability throughout the entire process.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just deliver. You need to consider the broader impact.
And my notes also highlight the importance of clearly defining everyone's roles within the project.
Precisely. For both efficiency in getting the work done and ensuring accountability.
Right.
Having clearly defined roles, the authority that comes with those roles, and the specific responsibilities of all stakeholders.
Yeah.
That's absolutely essential.
Okay, so projects are these like time-bound, unique undertakings with inherent risks that need like careful management.
For sure.
Now, your notes also delve into program management.
Right.
How does that concept differ from managing a single project?
That's a really important distinction to make. Program management, as the Project Management Institute defines it, is the centralized, coordinated management of group of interdependent projects to achieve the program's strategic objectives and benefits.
Okay.
Think of it as managing a collection of related projects that are all contributing to a larger, often more strategic goal.
Right.
These individual projects within a program are interdependent. They often share common objectives, draw on the same resources, and can even be subject to similar risks.
I see.
What's particularly interesting here is that the objectives of a program can sometimes be broader or more adaptable than those of a specific project within it, and the program itself might need to adjust its direction over time in response to changes in the wider environment.
Okay.
The program management lifecycle, as your notes outline, typically involves formulation, organization, deployment, appraisal, and ultimately dissolution once the strategic goals are met.
Okay.
So a program is the bigger picture,
right?
The strategic container for several interconnected projects.
That analogy of the umbrella makes the relationship between a program and its projects much clearer.
Yeah, it helps to visualize it.
Now, shifting gears slightly, the notes also mention the Project Management Office, or PMO.
Right.
What role does the PMO play in the overall landscape of project and program management?
So the PMO serves as a central hub for coordinating project-related activities across the organization. Its fundamental role is to bring systematic coordination and a more unified approach to how projects are managed. It provides central support functions, helps to standardize methodologies and control techniques across different projects, often manages and pools project resources, offers expert advice and guidance to project teams, and acts as a central repository for project management knowledge and best practices. However, as your notes rightly point out, the PMO isn't without its challenges. It can sometimes struggle to gain buy-in and alignment across different organizational divisions or departments. It can be perceived as an additional overhead cost. It often operates with limited direct decision-making power, acting more in an advisory or support capacity, and it might lack the necessary political influence within the organization to effectively drive significant changes or enforce standardized practices. So while it's there to provide structure and consistency, it can face internal resistance and operational hurdles.
So it's a support function that aims for consistency, but can face its own set of organizational realities.
For sure.
So we've laid the groundwork with these core definitions. Now let's get into the practicalities of how these projects are actually managed. Your notes detail several project management methodologies. It seems like there's a really diverse set of tools and approaches available.
Exactly. Different methodologies offer distinct frameworks and sets of principles for tackling projects. The choice of which methodology to use often hinges on the specific characteristics of the project itself, the prevailing organizational culture, and the particular goals you're aiming to achieve.
Let's start with waterfall. The name itself suggests a pretty linear progression.
Waterfall is indeed a more traditional sequential approach. Its core principle is to establish very clear and detailed requirements right at the beginning of the project. The project then progresses through a series of distinct self-contained stages, like requirements gathering, design implementation, testing, and deployment. With each stage needing to be largely completed before the next one begins. It has been commonly used in software development projects that are relatively short in duration, not overly complex, and where the requirements are well-defined and unlikely to change significantly. The key advantages of Waterfall are its straightforward and well-defined upfront design and requirements phase. It's generally easy to understand and follow the clear separation of stages aids in project organization and tracking progress. And there's typically a strong emphasis on thorough documentation, which can be valuable for knowledge transfer and onboarding new team members. However, the significant drawback of Waterfall is its rigidity. If errors are discovered or if the requirements change substantially later in the project lifecycle, it can lead to significant delays and potentially even require going back and redoing entire phases, which can be costly and time-consuming. It also heavily relies on the initial requirements being absolutely correct and complete, making it a less suitable choice for longer or more complex projects where those requirements are likely to evolve as the project progresses and stakeholders gain a better understanding of what's truly needed.
So if your international project has rock-solid, unchanging requirements. And operates in relatively stable environments.
For sure.
Waterfall's clear structure might be appealing.
Exactly.
So it sounds like a good fit for projects where you have a very clear vision from the outset. But less so when things are likely to shift or are inherently uncertain. Which feels quite relevant to the international context.
Absolutely.
Now, what about Agile? That seems to be the more talked about approach these days, particularly in software.
Agile offers a really significant contrast to the waterfall approach. It prioritizes a fast and flexible approach and is also very commonly used in software development, but increasingly in other fields as well. Instead of those rigid sequential stages, Agile is iterative, meaning the project is broken down into smaller cycles or increments with continuous collaboration with stakeholders, ongoing feedback, and adaptation to evolving needs at each step. It starts with a general understanding of the desired outcome, but the specific requirements are refined and developed throughout the project. Agile works best in situations where the initial goals and outcomes might not be completely clearly defined, where there's an anticipated need to accommodate changes quickly and efficiently, and where strong collaboration and communication are inherent strengths within the project team and with stakeholders. Its key advantages include its inherent flexibility and adaptability to changing requirements. A less stringent focus on exhaustive upfront documentation, allowing for more experimentation and learning by doing regular and frequent feedback from stakeholders ensuring the end product truly meets their needs, and the progressive reduction of failure risk through these iterative cycles and continuous adjustments.
So more about being adaptable and responding to change.
Yeah.
Which, again, feels very relevant when you're dealing with the complexities of international work.
For sure. For sure.
Now, building on that, your notes mention Scrum.
Right.
How does Scrum fit into this broader Agile landscape?
Right.
Is it a specific type of Agile?
Exactly. Scrum is a specific contemporary framework within the Agile umbrella.
Okay.
It places a really strong emphasis on the project team itself, utilizing short time-boxed work cycles called sprints, typically lasting around 30 days.
Okay.
And frequent, often daily stand-up meetings to facilitate communication and track progress.
Right.
Often in a pure Scrum implementation, the role of a traditional project manager is less prominent, with the teams being designed to be self-organized and self-managed.
Okay.
Scrum is ideally suited for highly experienced, disciplined, and motivated project teams who are capable of setting their own priorities and have a fairly clear understanding of the overall project requirements, even if the detailed specifications evolve. Scrum embodies this time box philosophy, aiming to deliver working increments of the product or service rapidly and frequently.
Okay.
However, the less rigid upfront scheduling and budgeting inherent in Scrum can sometimes lead to scope creep if not carefully managed.
Right.
And it might carry a potentially higher risk of failure if the team isn't truly self-directed and lacks the necessary experience or discipline.
I see.
It's also generally not as easily scalable for very large or geographically dispersed teams without careful adaptation.
Okay, so Scrum is like a very focused, rapid delivery implementation of Agile.
Yeah.
That really relies on a mature and self-sufficient team.
Exactly.
Next up in your notes is the critical path method, or CPM.
Right.
That sounds like it's all about planning and keeping to a schedule.
Precisely. The critical path method is a methodology that really focuses on meticulously planning and scheduling all the activities required to complete a project.
Okay.
It involves identifying every task, estimating the duration of each activity, and mapping out the dependencies between them. Yeah. Which tasks need to be completed before others can begin.
Right.
By doing this, CPM helps to identify which sequence of activities forms the critical path. That is the longest sequence of dependent activities that must be completed on time for the entire project to finish by its target deadline.
I see.
Any delays in activities on the critical path directly impact the overall project completion date.
Okay.
CPM is less well-suited for projects where the requirements are likely to change frequently.
Right.
But it's very applicable to complex projects with many interdependent parts and relatively fixed requirements, such as large construction or manufacturing projects.
Okay.
Its key advantages include providing a much clearer overall project schedule, improving the prioritization of tasks by highlighting those on the critical path, enabling better identification of critical activities and their optimal sequence, and facilitating more efficient planning of resource requirements.
Okay.
The disadvantages are that it typically requires experienced planners to develop and maintain the detailed network diagram. And like waterfall, it's often quite front-heavy. Yeah. Meaning a significant amount of detailed planning needs to be done right at the beginning of the project.
So CPM is the go-to when you have a big, intricate project where the steps are pretty well defined.
Yeah.
And sticking to a timeline is paramount.
For sure.
Now, this next one sounds particularly relevant in today's world.
Right.
Projects, Integration, Sustainable Methods, or PRISM. This seems to bring in a whole new set of considerations beyond just time and budget.
Yes. PRISM is a more contemporary project management methodology that was developed by Green Project Management Global. Its central focus is on actively accounting for and minimizing the adverse environmental impacts of projects throughout their life cycle.
Right.
What really distinguishes PRISM from some of the earlier methodologies is its explicit consideration of a much wider range of stakeholders going beyond just the immediate project team and client, and its strong emphasis on sustainability criteria, which encompasses social, economic, environmental, ethical, principled, and value-oriented aspects.
Right.
It also looks beyond the immediate project delivery to consider the longer-term impacts and legacy of the project.
Okay.
PRISM is particularly relevant for modern projects where environmental costs and sustainability are critical success factors. Such as large-scale infrastructure projects initiatives aimed at reducing energy consumption or waste management programs. It's often well-suited for large, complex real estate and industrial projects where environmental considerations are significant.
I see.
However, it might not be as directly applicable to projects where environmental impact isn't a primary concern.
Okay.
Such as purely digital software development or creative projects, and its successful implementation often requires stakeholders and contractors to be strongly aligned with its core sustainability principles.
So PRISM adds that really crucial layer of environmental and broader sustainability considerations,
Right.
which is increasingly vital in our interconnected world.
For sure.
Finally, we have Prince2. That sounds like a very structured and perhaps even bureaucratic approach.
Prince2, which stands for Projects in Controlled Environments, is indeed a very structured and process-driven project management methodology that's widely used by the UK government and has gained significant international adoption.
Right.
It provides a very clear framework and helps organizations maintain strong control over projects through a meticulous attention to detail, defined roles and responsibilities, and a strong focus on ensuring the anticipated return on investment is achieved.
Okay.
It's particularly well suited for large and complex projects with relatively fixed requirements where strong governance and accountability are essential. Its key advantages include effectively mitigating project risks through its comprehensive set of processes and attention to detail, promoting transparency and highly structured governance, ensuring clear action plans and decision points at each stage of the project, fostering strong and consistent communication among stakeholders. And its extensive documentation provides a common reference point. Which can be particularly helpful for less experienced project staff. However, its very emphasis on extensive documentation and adherence to process can sometimes make it more difficult to accommodate changes once the project is underway, often requiring significant rework of documentation and potential resource reallocation. And some might perceive its directive approach and the potential for bureaucratic overhead as limiting flexibility and speed, especially in rapidly changing environments. It's built around 7 core principles, 7 key themes, and 7 sets of processes. Providing a very defined and repeatable framework for project management.
Okay, so Prince2 is the methodology to choose when you need really tight control and have well-defined parameters, even if it potentially comes with a bit less flexibility.
Exactly.
It sounds like with all these different methodologies, it really is an approach for almost any type of project.
Absolutely, the right tool for the right job.
Now let's pivot to the central focus of our deep dive. What makes international projects specifically different and often more challenging? Your notes state quite clearly that they tend to be more complex, dynamic, and riskier. Why is that the case?
That really gets to the heart of the matter. International projects aren't simply domestic projects that happen to span across borders. They inherently involve a significantly greater degree of complexity, primarily due to the need to effectively engage with and navigate a much wider array of stakeholders. And the inherent diversity of national, organizational, and functional cultures, languages, and educational backgrounds. Your notes brilliantly highlight several specific ways in which international projects differ. Firstly, the scale of coordination and cooperation required is often exponentially more demanding. Think back to those powerful examples mentioned in your notes, such as the global IT architecture projects undertaken by major corporations like Citigroup, Cheap, and Cemex. These initiatives necessitate the seamless coordination of teams' systems and processes across vast geographical distances and incredibly diverse operational contexts. Secondly, sponsors, project champions, and project managers must conduct a far more comprehensive environmental assessment before the project even begins, meticulously considering a wide range of external factors captured by frameworks like PESTEL, political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal factors in each operating country. CAGE, cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic distances between the home and host countries. And we even need to consider the trends of globalization, this idea that globalization might be slowing down or even reversing in some areas, which can significantly impact supply chains, market access, and the overall feasibility of projects across borders. Then there are the unique strategic objectives that often drive international projects, such as Lenovo's acquisition of IBM's PC division, which wasn't just about increasing market share, but also gaining access to specific technologies and leveraging a globally recognized brand. Similarly, Daimler's acquisition of Chrysler was driven by the desire to gain a stronger foothold in the U.S. market and achieve economies of scale in production.
I see.
The organizational involvement in international projects is also often far more complex, frequently involving intricate structures like international networks, strategic alliances, and joint ventures, all operating within different and often conflicting political, economic, legal, and informal institutional landscapes.
Right.
Cultural sensitivity and deep local knowledge become absolutely paramount for success.
Okay.
Requiring project teams to skillfully navigate multiple national cultures and effectively involve organizations with very different ways of working.
Yeah.
Even seemingly straightforward aspects like managing deliverables and timelines can be significantly complicated by vast differences in time zones.
Right.
Although, as your notes astutely point out, this can sometimes be leveraged to create a round-the-clock workflow if managed effectively.
Oh, that's
Communication and expectation management in international projects demand a much greater intensity of effort and a higher degree of clarity on absolutely everything.
Wow.
From defining project requirements to assigning responsibilities and tracking actions. And finally, the critical aspect of managing cross-cultural teams is an integral and particularly demanding element, requiring extra awareness, significant investment in building understanding and trust, and nuanced insights into diverse communication styles and working preferences.
Okay.
Ultimately, all of these interconnected factors contribute to a significantly increased risk intensity in international projects compared to their domestic counterparts.
Yeah.
Stemming from the greater inherent complexity, the higher degree of diversity across all dimensions, more unpredictable dynamics in the external environment, and often the challenges of managing geographically dispersed and culturally diverse resources.
It's like complexity on top of complexity.
Exactly. And the core challenge in international projects boils down to managing increased diversity across all these dimensions, which amplifies existing project risks and necessitates far more robust communication and adaptation strategies.
That really paints a picture of how much more intricate things become when you step across borders.
Yeah.
It's clear that just having a solid project plan developed in one location isn't going to cut it in a global context.
Definitely not.
You've got to be thinking on so many different levels simultaneously.
Absolutely.
So given this significantly elevated risk landscape, how does one even begin to approach tackling these risks in an international project?
Yeah.
Your notes refer to a toolkit for global project success. What are some of the key elements in that toolkit?
Well, at the very foundation of that toolkit is a really solid understanding of what project risk actually is.
Okay.
As the Project Management Institute defines it, a project risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives, such as time, cost, scope, or quality. It's essential to remember that the various project management methodologies we've been discussing are at their core designed to help us anticipate, assess, and ultimately address these inherent project risks.
Okay.
However, as we've already highlighted, international projects are particularly vulnerable to what your notes aptly term emergent risks.
Right.
Unpredictable events like global pandemics, significant shifts in geopolitical landscapes, or major economic downturns in specific regions, which can have a disproportionately large and cascading impact across international borders.
Right.
The fundamental risk management process itself, as outlined by both the PMI and the work of Koester and Wilcox, involves several crucial steps.
Okay.
First and foremost, identifying potential risks, which includes systematically listing all the potential risks in a risk register and diligently trying to understand their underlying root causes.
Right.
Second, analyzing and prioritizing these identified risks based on a realistic assessment of both their probability of occurrence and the potential severity of their impact on the project objectives. Okay.
And third, performing detailed risk planning, which involves further assessing the likelihood of each significant risk, determining whether it's possible to avoid the risk altogether, and evaluating the extent of its potential impact if it does occur.
Right.
Once this thorough analysis is complete, the project team can then develop and implement appropriate risk mitigation strategies.
Okay, so it's a cyclical process of identify, analyze, plan, and then take action.
Right.
Your notes detail 4 key risk mitigation strategies.
Exactly.
Let's walk through those.
The first key strategy is risk avoidance.
Okay.
This involves taking proactive steps to completely eliminate the possibility of the risk occurring in the first place. Your notes provide the good example of employing adequate upfront planning to identify and remove potential risk sources.
Right.
Or perhaps using an Agile methodology's modular approach to break down a large, complex international project into smaller, more manageable components.
Yeah.
Thereby reducing the overall risk exposure of any single failure.
The second strategy is risk acceptance.
Okay.
Now, this isn't really about actively reducing the risk's impact,
Right.
but rather acknowledging that the risk exists and consciously deciding to take no specific action to mitigate it.
I see.
This decision is often made when the cost of mitigating the risk is judged to be disproportionately high compared to the potential negative consequences if the risk actually materializes.
Okay.
The third important strategy is risk transfer.
Okay.
This involves shifting the responsibility for managing a particular risk, and often the associated financial burden to another party.
Got it.
Common examples of risk transfer include purchasing insurance policies to cover potential losses,
Right.
obtaining guarantees or warranties from suppliers or contractors, or through strategic use of outsourcing or offshoring agreements, where the outsourced party takes on specific risks.
Okay.
Finally, there's risk absorption and pooling.
Okay.
This strategy involves sharing the potential impact of a risk with other entities, often by participating in consortia, strategic alliances, or joint ventures.
Right.
This approach is frequently employed in large-scale infrastructural projects and in new product development initiatives,
Okay.
where the sheer scale and complexity of the inherent risks are significant and best shared among multiple partners.
So it's about either steering clear of potential trouble altogether,
Yep.
accepting that some things are just part of the game,
Right.
passing the responsibility on in a controlled manner, or sharing the potential burden with others.
Exactly.
That's a really helpful framework for thinking about how to respond to risks.
For sure.
Now, your notes also touch upon risk profiling.
Okay.
How can project managers in an international context try to identify potential trouble signs
Right.
early in the project lifecycle before major problems actually arise?
Risk profiling is essentially about identifying key characteristics or indicators early in the project's initiation or planning phases
Okay.
that can signal a higher potential for certain types of risks to emerge later on. Wilcox, Hindle, and Lassity in their research identified 3 significant and relatively easily identifiable risk factors that apply to major projects in general, the level of rigor and sophistication in the project management disciplines being applied,
Okay.
the overall size and complexity of the project as measured by its timeline budget, and whether it's a relatively standalone effort or highly interconnected with other systems or initiatives.
Right.
And the degree of innovation involved in the project, whether it's in the product or service being developed, the processes being used, the underlying technology, the specific project management methodology being employed, the level of experience of the project manager and team, and crucially, whether the project has an international dimension compared to a purely domestic one.
Okay.
Building on this more general framework, Lassity and Wilcox developed a more detailed risk profiling approach specifically tailored for international projects,
Right.
which identifies 5 major areas of potential risk. Okay. These are the external context, which encompasses all those pestle and cage factors we discussed earlier, providing a lens for understanding the broader operating environment. The organizational history, which looks at the track record of the participating organizations in successfully delivering similar projects in the past. The internal context of each participating organization, including their strategic priorities, organizational structure, reward systems, human resource management practices, and employee relations.
Right.
The change content of the project itself, which includes its overall size and complexity, how well the uncertainty surrounding the project is defined and understood. The level of technical uncertainty involved the clarity of the project's goals and requirements, and the number of different business units or countries involved in the project. And finally, the change process, which considers factors such as the level of user commitment to the project, the adequacy of training and user experience, the overall project timeline, the experience and stability of the project team, the effectiveness of the project management practices being used, and the level of support and commitment from senior management.
So by carefully examining the external environment, learning from past experiences, understanding the internal dynamics of the organizations involved, really dissecting the specifics of the project itself, and evaluating how the change is being managed, you can build a much clearer picture of where the potential pitfalls might lie in an international project.
Exactly.
That sounds incredibly valuable for getting ahead of potential problems.
Precisely. It allows you to anticipate potential challenges and to strategically tailor your risk response plans rather than simply reacting to issues as they emerge.
Well, this has been a really illuminating deep dive into the multifaceted world of international project management.
It has, yeah.
It's abundantly clear that it's not just about applying standard project management principles across borders. It truly demands a different level of awareness, a greater degree of adaptability, and a much more strategic way of thinking.
Absolutely. The core insights for you to take away are the critical importance of thoroughly understanding the often subtle nuances of international context, carefully selecting a project management methodology that is genuinely aligned with the specific challenges and strategic objectives of your global project, and proactively identifying, assessing, and rigorously managing the elevated risks that are inherently associated with endeavors that span across different countries and cultures.
So here's a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Given the ever-increasing interconnectedness of our world, how might the fundamental principles and strategies we've discussed today not only apply to formal large-scale projects, but also to any collaborative effort, whether professional or even personal, that spans across different cultures or geographical locations in your own life or work?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It strikes me that many of these insights into communication, cultural sensitivity, and risk awareness could have a much broader relevance.
That's a really insightful point.
Yeah.
Recognizing the potential impact of cultural differences on communication, understanding the critical need for clear and consistent information sharing across diverse teams, and being mindful of potential risks and having contingency plans in place can indeed be incredibly valuable in a wide range of collaborative situations.
Right.
Both within our professional lives and even in our personal interactions in an increasingly globalized world.
We sincerely hope this deep dive has provided you with a valuable shortcut to understanding this complex and increasingly crucial topic.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating field.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.